Well, a Gonzaga season unlike any other, filled with highs and lows and heart attack inducing results, ended with a whimper on Sunday night after a horrific shooting night against UConn. What now?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome to the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here now to take you into another offseason for Gonzaga basketball. Folks, we're going to talk about the future of Locked On Zags, what this offseason is going to look like. We're also going to celebrate this team because they deserve to be celebrated for how tenacious and how battle-tested and how gritty they were. In the second segment, we're going to do that, but we're going to start the show with a little bit of a therapy session. You guys know, many of you who've listened to the show for a long time know that I tends to be on the more optimistic side, tends to be more of a glass half full person, not as much of a negative yeller regarding the team. But there was a lot of bad moments this year. And unfortunately, some of the issues that we saw throughout the season never really went away. They may have disappeared at times. Certainly, it felt like they were gone when Gonzaga waxed St. Mary's in the regular season finale and then waxed them again in the WCC championship. But they were never really gone. And UConn found a way to expose them. I assume everybody watched this game and does not need a full recap on the actual results in the game, nor does anybody want that. The Zags lost 82-54. That somehow almost doesn't feel like it encapsulates how disastrous of a game this was for the Bulldogs. They shot 2 of 20 from 3. 2 of 20. And that's it. UConn goes on to the Final Four. The Zags season ends in the Elite Eight. Drew Timme's career, and we will have a lot more on Drew Timme in the future. We have also just had a lot on Drew Timme. We celebrated him after the UCLA game. We celebrated his legacy. We talked about him after he made the announcement initially that he does not intend to return to college for another year. He still could, mind you, he could change his mind there. I think the odds of that happening are astronomically low because he has said that he's not going to, and he does not strike me as somebody who would go back on that at this point. But it was a hideous way for his career to end. And I said this on the post-game reaction video that's up on the feed right now. I said this on Locked On College Basketball as well. Most players' season ends in heartbreak. Only one team hoists that trophy at the end of the year. Everybody else, their career ends somewhere along the line, whether it's in a conference championship game, a conference tournament game, not even a championship necessarily. The amount of players who Gonzaga has ended their career in Las Vegas at the Orleans because they beat him in a semifinal game. And look at Khalil Shabazz. He's a great example of that. This is how players' careers unfortunately end. And for Drew Timme, it felt like he was going to will this team to a championship, and he just wasn't able to do it. Foul trouble was part of the issue. And, I think that foul that they called on him early in the second half, that fourth foul that he picked up, I think that was a bad call. And I think it was a bad call in the sense that I don't think you make that call. Was it technically a foul? Yeah, I think it's hard to argue that he didn't make contact with the guy. That's not necessarily the argument that I'm making here, but I just don't think you call that foul. Now, did it have an impact on the game? No. The Zags still shot 2 of 20 from 3 with or without Drew Timme on the floor. You could make an argument that had Drew been able to stay, maybe maybe UConn wouldn't have gone as big of a run. Zags wouldn't have had to been playing from behind as much. All of that is a fair and fine argument, a what-if scenario that people can explore, I guess, if they want to torture themselves a little bit longer thinking about this game. But at the end of the day, when your starting backcourt just doesn't give you anything, I just don't think that it's a recipe for success. And again, I mentioned trying to be an optimistic person, and I'm not down on Nolan Hickman's future, and we'll talk about that a lot more as we get further into the offseason. But he was very, very bad in the NCAA tournament. I mean, there's no possible other way to look at that. He did not score in this game or against UCLA. He had 5 assists and 2 turnovers in this game, so fine. His assist to turnover ratio was not a huge issue, and it was something that I kind of have fiercely defended Nolan Hickman about. It's like, hey, look, he had some turnover issues earlier in the year, but for the majority of the season, he was careful with the basketball. But what it ended up creating was a situation where he didn't really do much. He didn't turn the ball over, but he also didn't get a lot of assists. He didn't make a lot of shots. He kind of just was there, and he played fine defense, and he shot fine from three. Is 35% on the season. So his numbers were all fine. And I don't think that he's bad by any stretch of the imagination. I think he will continue to improve and be a good point guard for Gonzaga. But this is 2 years in a row where towards the end of the year, Gonzaga didn't need him as much last year because they had Andrew Nembhard, but he was not there at the end of the season last year. And then this year, he went 0 of 10 from 3 in the NCAA tournament. And most of them were good shots. I don't remember Nolan Hickman taking like really ugly shots early in the shot clock. I don't remember him taking contested threes. They were open looks coming off screens, getting the ball swung around to him, and when the defense is behind on the rotations, like they were open good looks. He just could not find the bottom of the net. He just couldn't do it. Finishes the tournament averaging 2 points, 2.5 assists, and 0.8 turnovers. 2 points from your starting point guard. Rasir Bolton, not a whole lot better. He had 6 points in this game. Didn't score again in that UCLA game. The backup guards were better again. And I know how frustrating that is to see that happen. I said on the show before the game that I didn't think Mark Few and the staff would change the starting lineup. I'm not surprised that they didn't. But it was so hard to watch Malachi Smith be clearly Gonzaga's best guard and not start. He played a lot, and he deserved to. He had 8 points and 3 boards. Not his best night against UConn, but it wasn't anybody's best night against UConn. He was fine in that game. Salas was fine in this game, 5 points on 2 of 5 shooting. He picked up 2 fouls, which was part of the reason he didn't play as much in the first half as maybe he would have otherwise, and that's an issue for him going forward. I think looking at his future at Gonzaga, I think he's going to be a potential breakout star next year. For the Zags, I think a lot of people are kind of identifying that, but that's an issue, an area that he's going to need to work on is using his hands a little bit less defensively and not picking up some of those fouls. But in this game, your backcourt doesn't give you anything. And not even that. Anton Watson and Julian Strother didn't give you anything either. Strother was 4 of 15 in this game, 0 of 6 from deep. I mean, you need more than that. And this is why I say that this game was kind of an encapsulation of all of Gonzaga's issues this year. Nobody else stepping up besides Drew Timme was cost Gonzaga games this year, and it did it again here. If Julian Strother is going to score 11 points, if Rasir Bolton's going to score 6 points, if Nolan Hickman's going to score 0 points, 17 points between those 3 guys here. We'll add on Anton Watson, who had 6 points, 23 points from your 4 starters not named Drew Timme. It is just not going to get it done. It's not going to get it done. Anton Watson, he was 3 of 4 shooting, which is fine. He had 6.6 rebounds. He was 0 of 4 from the free throw line, which is unfortunately kind of on brand for him at this point. He's really, really bad from the free throw line. But in a game where Drew Timme couldn't get much going, where he sat for large stretches of the games, why is Anton Watson only taking 4 shots? I don't understand that. He should have been 7 for 10 in this game. Or at least you should have had 10 attempts. Like, I don't understand why and shout out to UConn. They played a good defensive game, and they do deserve some credit for that. But it was tough to see him not get utilized the way that I thought he could have in this game. There's no need to continue to litigate this basketball game. It happened. The Zags did not show up. They're done for the season. But what a season that it was. It was one of the most unique Gonzaga basketball seasons that I can remember. I think this is the most unique Gonzaga team since 2016, that 11-seeded team that went to the Sweet 16. Let's talk about what made them so special. But first, I want to tell you all about today's sponsor, Built Bar. The Built March Madness bracket is here, and we know that you have a favorite bar or puff, and now's your time to make it count. So go to BuiltMarchMadness.com to vote for your favorites. You know I'll be voting for the churro bar, and if you want to take your favorite team to win, then you'll be voting for that bar too. Support your team, support your bar or puff. And when you vote for your favorite bar or puff, you will be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. Not only that, but one Locked On fan will win a 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your door. You have got to try Built. It is the best protein bar ever. Seriously, they are so amazing. You will not think they're good for you. What makes Built Bars so good? Well, for starters, they're high in protein, they're low in sugar, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. So run to BuiltMarchMadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March, so hop in and support your pick. Built Bar, a proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. All right, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags. And I want to thank all of you for making Locked On Zags your first listen of the day. For your second listen today, check out the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. We're still rolling through the Final Four into the national championship, talking all things college basketball, coaching carousel, transfer portal, NCAA tournament games, everything about this beautiful, crazy, wild sport covered 5 days a week on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. It is available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. Go hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so yet. All right, I want to talk about this team. I want to give them some love, some accolades, a conversation about the uniqueness and the beauty of this squad because we don't get to see them play basketball again. And that sucks. It sucks every year. This feeling of seeing the season end and knowing that, we know of a few players who are never going to play for Gonzaga basketball again. The only one that I guess we know for certain is Rasir Bolton. We think there's a 99+% chance that Drew Timme will not be returning. There are other players who I think are potentially likely out the door. Those are conversations for another show, whether Julian Strother goes to the NBA, whether Anton Watson or Malachi Smith return or decide to move on. All of that stuff will be covered at a separate time. But I want to talk about this team. And it started with a ridiculously tough non-conference schedule, a schedule that only somebody like Mark Few could put together. They started the season with that win they had the North Florida win, then they had the win over Michigan State on the aircraft carrier, and then the Texas loss. And after that, there was concern. Boy, was there concern about where this team was at. Texas waxed them on their home floor at the Moody Center. At that time, of course, it was hard to know that Texas was going to be a potential front runner to win the national championship at this point. Even Michigan State, a team that, people were stressed that Gonzaga didn't play well because they didn't look very good. Well, they went to the Sweet 16. So I think that's fine. Then, of course, you have your losses to Purdue and Baylor. And at that point, the Zags were 5-3. 5-3, mind you, with losses to teams that finished with a 1 seed, a 2 seed, and a 3 seed. So, I think you take that with a grain of salt. They also had wins a little later with Alabama. They had the Michigan State win, Xavier, Kentucky. Look, that's a 1 seed, that's a 7 seed, that's a 3 seed, that's a 6 seed for Kentucky. All teams that did well in the NCAA tournament at least won a game. Every one of those teams won a game. Most of them won 2 games, Kentucky being the lone exception there. And I think there's no doubt in my mind that the non-conference schedule prepared this team in ways that they had never been prepared before, because it was not a veteran-laden team. It was not a team filled with one-and-done superstars. That 2020-2021 schedule that had Kansas and Virginia and Iowa early in the season, Gonzaga just ran through that schedule because they had a once-in-a-generational talent like Jalen Suggs, along with Drew Timme, along with a very good NBA player right now in Corey Kispert, along with Joel Ayayi. Like, they had a really, really deep talent. I mean, Andrew Nembhard was on that team as well. Like, they had a loaded team. This year's team was not that. They just weren't. They weren't as talented as that roster. They weren't as talented as the year after that with Chet Holmgren. They just weren't. But they played a tougher schedule, and it helped them so much throughout the season. It was so great to see how much this team improved. And then they got into the conference play, and guess what? The WCC was good this year. Do not let anybody tell you otherwise. Just don't let them. Of course, conference realignment is going to be a huge conversation this offseason, and people who are strongly wanting Gonzaga to move to a conference, I get it. I'm with you. I understand. Moving to the Big 12 would be a monstrous move for the Zags if it were to happen. But don't let that dissuade from the fact that the WCC was a good basketball conference this year. And the Zags had to work for those victories, and they did. They did. Rasir Bolton tipped the ball in against University of San Francisco in an iconic shot, forever remembered by the green sweatshirt man screaming in his face. Julian Strother hit that beautiful game-winning 3 against BYU, and then for the heck of it, did it again against UCLA. The Zags needed Nolan Hickman coming up clutch at the end of the game against Santa Clara in order for them to win that one. They even had the loss to LMU, which prepared them because they smoked them the next time they played them. They lost to St. Mary's, and they came out fired up and beat the tar out of them twice after that. This team was tough. They were gritty. They knew how to win close games, and they knew what to do to teams that beat them. And they took care of business the second time after that. And it wasn't always just Drew Timme. And that's something that I loved about this team. Yeah, Drew willed them to a handful of victories. He willed them to a victory against Michigan State. He willed them to a victory against UCLA in the NCAA tournament. But Rasir Bolton was the winner for that San Francisco game. Like I mentioned, Nolan Hickman was the winner in that Santa Clara game. Julian Strother was the winner in that BYU game. He also was the winner in the Xavier game in the PK Invitational. They needed a couple clutch threes from him in the final 2 minutes of that game in order to win. Another team that, won a couple games in the NCAA tournament as a 3 seed. There was also so much growth from Gonzaga's younger players because of this schedule, because of how difficult it was. And that was one of my favorite things in the entire season to watch. Ben Gregg's growth and development was astronomical. He finished the season averaging 5 points, 3 boards, 1.3 offensive rebounds, which is fantastic for a player in his role. He also averaged 0.7 blocks per game. He shot 37.7% from deep. That is elite. Like we made Killian Tilly comparisons for Ben Gregg when he first got to Gonzaga. He didn't play much his first couple of years. It was like, okay, is he ever actually going to kind of reach that threshold? And they're somewhat different players. Tilly never shot below 40%. He was an elite 3-point shooter, but in his first year as a legitimate role for Ben Gregg to shoot about 38% from deep while being a tenacious offensive rebounder, while, showing at least some level of competence as a shot blocker, while also shooting 62% around the rim. That is fantastic. Exceeded my expectations by a considerable amount. I'm happy to admit that. And then you have Hunter Sallis. Hunter Sallis' numbers this year and last year do not look incredibly different. If you were to just check out his Sports Reference basketball page, you might think, oh, those look kind of the same. But he improved dramatically as a facilitator. His assist numbers are up a bunch. And part of that is because Gonzaga shifted him to a backup point guard role. They wanted him to be the guy bringing the ball up the court and getting Gonzaga into their offense. And it made sense. What a call by Mark Few to do that. Now, one of the big questions next year is who's going to start at point guard, because it might be Hunter Sallis. He might be the guy that does that, whether that pushes Nolan Hickman into a combo guard role, whether that pushes him to the bench entirely. Those are questions that Mark Few's got a lot of months to figure out how that's going to shake out. And of course, potential transfers coming in, transfers coming out, all that stuff will change the equation there a little bit. But what a development for Hunter Sallis. He's still got some stuff he's got to work on. So does Ben. They all do. They're young guys. But for Sallis, like defensively, he was elite. He's got to work on using his hands a little bit less, committing a few less fouls. Offensively, I love his aggression, his ability to go to the rim. He's a little bit tentative shooting from the outside. I'd like to see that bump up. Certainly the percentage could afford to bump up too. I think he shot about 26% from 3, but he's got a good looking shot. Like I believe strongly that he's going to be a good 3-point shooter. Maybe not elite. I don't know that he's going to ever shoot 45% like Rasir Bolton did in his first year, or 40% or anything like that. But if he became 35% 3-point shooter, maybe doesn't take a ton per game, maybe 3 attempts per game, shoots 35%, gets to the rim with reckless abandon, plays elite defense. I mean, Hunter Sallis could be a all WCC performer. Like he's that good. And he showed that this year, despite his numbers not dramatically improving. He showed it. And then there's Nolan Hickman. And I know we're not happy with Nolan Hickman right now. And I've been a fierce defender of Nolan Hickman throughout the season, and I continue to believe that he deserves to be a valuable member of this team. But his stretch toward the end of the year, he's just not doing enough, and it's been tough to watch. Having said that, the improvements he made throughout the year were significant as well. And his overall season numbers do not look as bad as people think that they do. I can promise you that. 7.5 points per game, 3 assists, 2.5 rebounds, 1 steal per game. He shot 35% from deep. He shot 81% from the free throw line. That's all really good. You'd like to see the assist numbers a little bit higher. Part of that was just the offense this year was more facilitated on getting Drew Timme the ball and letting him facilitate the offense, which I think made sense. That won't be the case next year, so we'll see how that changes the guard play for this team in general. His assist to turnover numbers were good, in part because he didn't have very many assists or turnovers. So it kind of goes back to my, I wish we got to see him do a little bit more. And the struggles down the stretch were really tough. But it's very clear that the Nolan Hickman we saw in November and the Nolan Hickman we saw at the end of the year, even with the struggles towards the end of the year, he was a better basketball player. He just couldn't get the ball to go down the net towards the end of the season, and it really, really hurt the Zags. And then, of course, there's the Anton Watson story, and we will talk so much more So much more about Anton Watson. Hopefully he will be back for a 5th year and the story will continue in Spokane. But for him to come out and average 11 points, 6.5 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 2 steals per game, he shot 33% from 3. Folks, that is incredible. This is a guy who shot 11% his first year. For him to shoot 33% this year is a massive, massive improvement. He also shot 66% on 2-pointers, one of the most efficient low post scorers in the entire country. Elite defensive player, on-ball defense, trap defense, elite hands, poking the ball away. His steal numbers are some of the best in the country. What a season. We'll ignore the 55% from the free throw line, although that is a pretty big issue for Mr. Watson. But one of my favorite stories in all of college basketball and all of Gonzaga basketball history is Anton Watson's development this season. We will see if he ends up coming back or not. And that kind of leads into the final part of the show here. It's the offseason for Gonzaga basketball, and we're going to have some instant reaction to what that means. And we're going to talk about the future of this here Locked On Zags podcast, all after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. The NCAA tournament is almost over, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is bonus bets back if your first bet does not win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and threes drained. Maybe you like Domantas Sabonis to keep putting up huge numbers for Sacramento. Maybe you like Zach Collins in his new role with the Spurs to keep up the high production. Maybe you want to make an exclusive bet like Corey Kispert hitting 2 threes in the first 3 minutes of Washington's next game. He's been playing great, so it's not a bad bet right there. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, segment 3, still Eddie Patton, still Locked On Zags, and that's what I want to talk about because it's the offseason. There will not be any more game recaps. There will not be any more previews of Gonzaga's upcoming game, at least not until November. But in the infamous words of Leonardo DiCaprio in Wolf of Wall Street, I'm not going anywhere. Locked On Zags is still coming at you 5 days a week, folks. It is not over. There will be a point in this offseason where we will drop down to probably 3 episodes per week. Probably in July, August, somewhere in there. That tends to be the slowest part of the basketball-only college season. And I've always felt and enjoyed my kind of unique place within the Locked On podcast community as the only, there's 80 plus college podcasts on the Locked On network, which is extraordinary. By the way, check some of them out if you haven't yet. Some fantastic content. If any of you are interested in Oregon or UCLA or Houston or Baylor, whatever it may be, check it out. They are fantastic, but they all have football, and I don't. This is a college basketball almost exclusive podcast. So we're going to get you 5 days per week's worth of content, even if we don't have a football team to talk about. So that's where I want your help. That's where I want to appeal to you all, people who listen to the show, because some of you have only been listening through March, through the NCAA tournament. I see the numbers, I know, and that's great. I appreciate every single one of you. If this is the first show you've listened to, if this is the 150th show, does not matter. I appreciate you, and I want to hear from you. Here's the stuff that we're going to talk about this offseason. This is the stuff that I got planned. Of course, we're going to cover the transfer portal and the NBA draft. Those are huge, huge storylines that are going to be discussed at large throughout the season as we're seeing transfer information, as we're seeing new recruiting information. I didn't mention that, but of course, any recruits the Zags are interested in for this upcoming class, for future classes, whatever it may be. We're going to cover the NBA draft, what that means for the current players at Gonzaga, who's declaring, who's not declaring, all of that good stuff. Other college basketball news around the WCC, around the West Coast, around the whole sport in general, just national conversations. Certainly we see that a lot around the offseason. We'll talk about the baseball team. Shout out Coach Brandon Harmon and the baseball staff. He's been on the show a few times. I'm hoping to continue to have conversations about that team. We'll talk women's basketball. Of course, we had Lisa Fortier on the show last year and Brenna Maxwell on the show, both during the offseason. We'll hope to do more of that. We'll have a lot of conversations about conference realignment. That's for dang sure, as we continue to hear rumors about the Big 12 and see if that heats up. If that happens, of course, that will be a primary talking point throughout the offseason. We'll talk about NBA Zags. We do that quite regularly, have some recaps on their seasons, especially with the way that Corey Kispert has played lately. Zach Collins has been playing the best basketball of his career as well. Domantas Sabonis, of course, is absolutely elite. We'll talk other pro Zags. I love giving you folks updates on Zags in Europe. What's Silas Melson up to? What's Admon Gilder up to? What's Ryan Woolridge up to in the G League? Josh Perkins, Kyle Wiltshire, Jeremy Jones, Jonathan Williams, all those guys. Like, let's talk about those guys. Let's talk about the players on this year's team. Rasir Bolton, where's he going to sign? Where does he end up? We'll give you updates on all that stuff as well. Olympics, a lot of Canadians end up playing. A lot of former Zags end up playing for the Canadian team. Kelly Olynyk, we'll try it again. Kyle Wiltshire, Andrew Nembhard could. Brandon Clark technically could if he wanted to. Kevin Pangos certainly could be in there. We'll have interviews. We'll talk to former players. We'll talk to coaches. We'll talk to media members. We'll talk to everybody out there who's willing to talk to us. I love finding people to talk to on the show. If you have suggestions on that, please let me know on that. We'll share fan stories. We'll have opportunities to see your connection to Gonzaga, your feelings. Maybe we'll have like a Hoop Fest one, talk about your stories with Hoop Fest, all that good stuff. Mailbag Monday is not going anywhere. It may not be every single Monday. Certainly was not this Monday, but we will continue to do Mailbag Monday. We'll continue to do Andy Locks, which is our hot takes segment as well. Tuesday's show, for the record, is going to be a much bigger look at the biggest storylines this offseason. So today we wallow. Today we discuss the UConn game. We feel our feels. We feel what it felt like to lose that game, to know that another Gonzaga basketball season is officially in the books, will not be any more games played. And then Tuesday, we talk about the 6 biggest storylines this offseason. We're going to get straight into it. We're also going to have some of those, recaps, individual player recaps, full episode dedicated to every single player on Gonzaga's roster, talking about their history, how they performed this past season, how that compared to the best and worst case scenarios we laid out before the season, and their future. Are they coming back? Are they staying? What's their role look like next year? All of that. I like the offseason content. I do. It's fun for me. It's fun to continue to find ways to engage this wonderful, beautiful, exciting, energetic, enthusiastic Gonzaga basketball community. I love you all. I love that we get to have these conversations, that I get to podcast for you in July, in August, in September. I love that the show is not just November to March. I do. I love that we get to have these conversations throughout the offseason, and I want your help with thoughts, with ideas, with conversation starters, whatever it may be, because that's what makes this so fun for me. This day is not so fun. Sunday's not fun. Saturday was not fun. Monday probably won't be fun as you're listening to this. Probably not fun. But then we get into the offseason, and we will have so much fun stuff to talk about, and I want your help in making this show the very best that it can be, because I believe that this is the best Gonzaga basketball community that exists, is the Locked On Zags community. And I want your help to continue to make it so. All right. That is going to do it for me today. Plenty more coming your way this week. Of course, we're going to talk about the biggest offseason storylines on Tuesday. We're going to continue to look at the rest of the NCAA tournament as it comes together. We'll, of course, continue to talk about the transfer portal and anything else that might start coming up this week. Also, check out the Locked On College Basketball podcast if you haven't done so yet. Go hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Hit it for Zags. Hit it for Locked On College Basketball. Why not? It takes 10 seconds to go hit the subscribe button for both shows, and it's very, very helpful and appreciated by yours truly. All right. That is going to do it for me today for the last time during the season for the Zags. Go Zags.